As we are recording, more than 100 deaths have been reported from the flooding in Central Texas that happened on July 4th, including 27 children and counselors at Camp Mystic in Hunt, Texas.
And there are still 10 reported missing, right? Is there still 10 missing from the camp?
It's my understanding that they're still searching. Sarah, I've tried to avoid listening to stories about this, and then when I start, I can't seem to stop because it's just so vivid. It's just easy to understand what happened here and impossible at the same time. And you have these kids at summer camp, and we're all in the mix of sending our kids to various summer camps. And it's not that I feel fear for my kids in a different way. It's just that empathy is so present. You can just so quickly put yourself in the shoes of a parent who is waiting and wondering and then grieving in such an intense way.
Well, my 10-year-old son is in summer camp in Texas right now. Felix is at Camp Sweeney in northern Texas. So, yeah, this hits particularly close to home. My older two are at Camp Ernst near you in northern Kentucky. I think our minds feel so busy around this story because there's so much to process. There is the quotidian nature of children at camp, sort of everyday, average. I mean, this camp itself stretches back almost 100 years. A through line through so much change in America with this summer camp experience. I mean, when Nicholas and Griffin were taking Felix to camp in Texas, they listened to Notes on Camp, the famous This American Life episode, and we realized it came out in 1998. The children they're profiling in that episode are like my age. Camp is so special. It's just really, really special. And so you're holding these children in this everyday, almost eternal kind of experience. This really, really precious thing. Beside this extraordinary event and the levels of, sort of once in a lifetime, that it was a holiday weekend, that it was in the evening, that you had this massive amount of water come down 26 feet, the river rose in 45 minutes. So you're putting together this, natural disaster in combination with this beautiful thing that has existed for so long that feels sort of removed from time, right? So this sort of outside of our everyday lives thing and this other outside of our everyday lives disaster, and trying to hold them both when you're talking about 7 and 8 and 9-year-old children is just, it's the hardest. It's the absolute hardest.
I dropped off kids from my church at camp yesterday. They were all middle school age. And it was about a 3.5-hour drive down to camp. And I'm driving our church van, and they're in the back, and they start off pretty quiet and then on their phones. And it was like as we got physically closer to camp, they transformed as kids. The closer we got, the more they put the phone down and talked to each other and talked about camp and who they hoped to see and what they hoped to do. And then when they got out of the van they dropped their stuff so fast in their cabins and ran to this open space where kids had congregated to play Foursquare and to hug each other, to say hi to people that they haven't seen since the last time they were at camp together. And it was like watching them age in reverse, and just get to be unburdened, playful and silly and delighted by the simplest things. This camp could not be any more throwback. There is nothing fancy about it. They're just happy to be out in this beautiful space away from everything. And I cried for most of my drive back, just thinking about that. One, like what a gift it is to be able to give kids this kind of space. And why is that so hard? Why does it have to be so contained in the camp experience? But then also just thinking about this community where it's an extraordinary event, except that it's not that flooding is well understood, and flooding for people who live near rivers is a part of life that you hold with a lot of different emotions. On Saturday, Chad and I went to this little village that's right on the Ohio River, and they were having a cardboard boat regatta, which is a delightful thing to watch. But we were standing above the flood wall with the river way, way, way below us watching the cardboard boat regatta. And as they were making announcements, there was this moment of just real gratitude because just weeks ago, the river was way above that flood wall and this little village had been flooded. And so I think that's part of where your brain starts to like grab for whys. Who knew what and when, and what could have been done to prevent this? And then you sort of rush that away because it seems, I don't know, too soon and it's too much to hold alongside all these other things. But then you have to ask those questions because it will happen again. That it is not so uncommon that you can say, well, it'll probably be another 100 years before we experience something like this. It won't. And so what can we learn from it, and what can we do, and how can we try to hold all these things together? It is taxing for everybody.
My town is on the banks of the Ohio River. The convergence of the Mississippi and the Ohio is nearby. The story of my town is one of flooding. In 1937, we had an enormous flood. I mean, you can go into buildings downtown, some of which retain sort of the water markings. There's everywhere you can go. And I tell my kids, like, look, this is where the water went before we had the flood wall. This is how high it was downtown. This is how far inland it went. To respect how powerful that river is and how quickly things can change. This is something I've learned from my husband, who was a lifeguard for several years and just has an enormous respect for the power of water. And I do not think that it is politicizing tragedy to demand good governance. Through our travels, probably in part because of Camp Sweeney and for a lot of reasons, I've really come to love the great state of Texas over the last few years. It went from sort of a political characterization in my mind to a living, breathing place I really enjoy visiting, even in summer. I was there in Houston last weekend. But part of Texas's political reality, which is their governing reality, is this sort of hands off. That's how they got into a mess with their electric grid during a winter when many, many people lost their lives. And it seems to be another hard reality of this tragedy. I reject that in 2025, when we're talking about artificial general intelligence, that there's nothing we can do to prevent 27 children from being swept out of their beds in the middle of the night by a flood. I reject that. Do I think that there is a reality in which we protect everyone from natural disasters? Of course not. But there could have been more done. More lives, more young lives could have been saved. And when we approach government this way, as if something that it is only a problem, it is never worth investing in, it is only something to be limited and restricted, or, of course, used when it's of the utmost priority around our particular chosen culture war, these are the people who suffer. These are the people who suffer. I have been in meetings with local governments when we have talked about emergency management systems, and nobody wants to exhibit the leadership to say, of course it's expensive, but we will explain it. We will take the heat because lives are on the line. Nobody wants to do it, but it has to be done because that's what government is about. This is why you need government. You need data, you need warning, you need investment, or else you trade off short-term pain. For what? Long-term savings? No. 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 It's unacceptable.
Well, it's trading off short-term pain for long-term dysfunction on so many levels. I mean, it's ultimately more expensive to not do disaster preparedness, to not do emergency management well, to not invest in these ideas. And look, I think that I am sympathetic to arguments about what government can do well and what it can't. This is a government role. This is the most fundamental role of government at every level, and you need every level. A county like the one I grew up in that has been devastated by flooding this year because it sits on the Green River cannot have in it the resources and expertise to manage that kind of event alone. The state of Kentucky, which has an abundance of water everywhere, it makes it a beautiful place to live, cannot have the resources and expertise to do this alone. This is, again, why I'm so frustrated with the way that the administration is approaching leadership, and not just this administration. I mean, again, this is an old problem. No one wants to prioritize preparing for what could go wrong. But if you just take the current situation, you have people who want to take money away from the meteorologist, who want to phase out FEMA in favor of states where this kind of expertise exists, maybe in pockets, but not spread across the entirety of the country. And we do not have states that are immune from some form of disaster. And then you go, okay, well, maybe philanthropy can handle it. Sure, but a lot of philanthropy depends on federal grant funding in some form. Okay, maybe universities can handle it. Again, those are research grants. Like, somewhere we all have to contribute our money to a place that then says, here's how we grow the resources and expertise that we need to keep our communities safe, whether those communities are filled with a couple million people or less than 10,000. Some kind of nature will come to the door in a way that they deserve to be not isolated from, but to know that someone's thought about it and has a plan for it, and they have some chance of surviving it. So it is painful to go back through county commission meetings in Kerr County, Texas, and ask, why did we say the sirens were too expensive? It sucks. It's a horrible exercise. It is a necessary exercise because Kerr County is so representative of so much of America. And we've got to figure out how to make preparing for these events a priority, especially as we see a clear trajectory of the frequency and severity of weather events.
This does feel like a place where we are, again, going through a very painful transition, where we have to decide this is the role of government, and we are going to support people who run not on trying to escape blame, but taking responsibility. I'm encouraged by the Lieutenant Governor of Texas saying, yeah, we should have done something and now we will. We have to hold our political leaders to account. We have to say this is what we require from leadership, and we have to pay for it. We have to pay more in taxes. It's expensive. These emergency management systems are expensive. They are going to take tax increases. So is back to our first conversation. If we all want to keep getting Social Security, we're going to have to pay more in taxes. If everything's more expensive, including for the government. And I just don't know. I understand that when everything's more expensive, the last thing we want to do is pay more in taxes. But the government's paying for everything too, and that is also more expensive. We're not going back to before COVID. None of the prices are going back to there. That's just not going to happen. And I'm just so frustrated with the ways in which this stuff gets obfuscated and hidden and forgotten. And I am sympathetic to the idea that oh my God, we haven't even found everybody yet and we have to start talking about this. But the unfortunate reality is we all have really short attention spans. And the next disaster will move on. It's hard to keep sustained attention on these things. Not for the local communities, but you want to take your moment in the national spotlight to aim that energy where you want it to go. And I don't think aiming it towards good government is a waste. I really, really don't. Because the sacrifices of the first responder and the way the communities are going to just be laser focused on rescuing these people, that's nothing NBC News can help with. You know what I mean? The New York Times can't help with that. Everybody's doing the best they can with what is there. Everyone's showing up. They have enormous resources. The search and rescue operations, it's so important. But I'm not worried about them not having the resources they need for that. People show up and show out in those moments. What can the New York Times do? They can start asking some hard questions about these. They can dig through the commissioner reports, and they are well-suited and well-trained for it, so let them do it. That's not a politicization. I really don't believe that. That's the job of good journalists, and I'm glad they're doing it.
Look, if I were a mayor or a county commissioner somewhere, I would be pouring through this too and thinking about my own county or my own town and where have we considered things that we need to take a second look at? Where have we considered and rejected proposals that we need to go back and look at? What problems have we never discussed? What have we not anticipated? And how do we prepare for it? I think this situation highlights the best of us in that, God, the sacrifices that people have made to care for each other during and in the wake of this are incredible. And so you can't look at this county and paint it as full of a bunch of hardened people who don't care about each other. That's clearly not what it is. It's an incredibly loving community where people are coming together in a massive way. Okay. So then what do we learn about preparation and decisions that are made in advance, and allocation of resource and opportunity cost in our politics? How many people who could be doing detailed, tedious work around emergency management and disasters, how many of those people have lost election or been dissuaded from running at all because they know that if they run for a seat on the county commission, they're going to get more questions about abortion? They're going to get more questions about Jeffrey Epstein, about these culture war issues that are distractions from the things that we actually want people to take responsibility around. In these local elections, there's a place for national issues. It's when people are running for national office. But true local government has suffered tremendously because we treat everyone as though they're running for president. And I hope that something we can take from this is that we really need people at every level who will focus on things that are never going to be discussed on a cable news panel, but that matter tremendously.
But that's the thing, though. They are being discussed on a cable news panel right now. So now is the time to focus and ask these questions in your community. We have a really bad problem as human beings that when something terrible like this happens, we either say, that could never happen to me, or this is why this could never happen to me. We want to find the reasons why this tragedy doesn't apply to us. That's a bad political instinct. You don't have to be a mayor or a city commissioner to start asking those questions. Fire up your email right now and ask your own commissioner or mayor. Hold them to account right now. Where are we on emergency preparedness? I know those aren't fun headlines to read in a local newspaper, but like those are the questions. Instead of, sharing a million donation posts, we all know how to give money to the Red Cross. Like, do this instead. Focus your grief for this community into making your own better. So you're not the next one on the cover of the New York Times. Like, that's what we should do. That's how we should honor the people who have died, by saying, okay, where can I look closely? Where can I hold my officials to account? Where can I say, what are you doing around emergency preparedness? I'm willing to pay more for this. What do we need to do? I mean, I think that is worthwhile. That is worthwhile. Instead of, what I knew was inevitable. I knew it. I told my husband, he was like, you're crazy. People aren't going to do that. And then he was like, oh my God, I'm already seeing it. This is why I don't send my kids to camp. What a shitty response. What a shitty response. I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming. People love to justify their anxieties. And I saw it almost immediately. See, this is why. No. Because what are you saying about the parents who sent their children to Camp Mystic? Come on. You're a smarter, better parent than they were? Get it together, internet. Get it together.
And we don't have to take an adversarial posture about this with our local officials. You could send that email today and say, how can I help? What do you need to be able to spend more time and attention and money on disaster preparedness in our community? How can I get involved with this? Where should I go looking to better understand what our plans are? We want people to want to serve in these positions. We want people who are willing to be thoughtful and thorough to want to do these jobs. And so we don't have to go in hostile. But I think you're absolutely right that there is a limit to what making a donation will do. The broader impact can be in elevating this issue permanently. I think a lot about Sandy Hook Promise and the way a group of people had this unspeakable tragedy unfold. Just horrific. And they have gone about the extremely long-term work of attacking that problem of gun violence in a huge variety of ways. Advocacy for legislation, but also hotlines for schools and education and outreach. And they have said, we don't want this ever again in our community or anywhere else. And we're willing to invest in that for the very, very long term, because it is a long-term problem. And that's the thing with disasters. There's not going to be a moment of like, well, we fixed it. We don't have to worry about weather anymore. It is a reality that we have to live with, but we have better ways to live with it all the time if we will stay on it.
I have sort of re-engaged in my own community in a couple ways recently. And what I've realized, and I guess I knew this if I'd really forced myself to articulate it. We all say like the squeaky wheel gets the grease. It's not just that. It's not just that the people who are the loudest around issues like abortion get so much political energy. and ways to apply it. It's that people in leadership use silence as a form of power too. And so when they get in a meeting for emergency management and they say, well, people are loudest about cutting taxes and no one's knocking down my door about wanting sirens, they use that. They use the silence as a form of triangulation. Well, no one's complaining about it. No one's at the meetings. I haven't heard anybody say anything about this. And so I think that reality is something I'm really trying to keep front and center. Not because we have to be adversarial, but because we have to be clear. This is what I want. The fact that I don't have it is a problem. Like, I'm not the only one who feels this way. I'm really trying to encourage people to just open up the lines of communication with the leaders in your community, because that silence becomes a form of complacency on all of our parts. And I just see a lot of complacency in a lot of different areas of my community and my institutions. I think it is absolutely a part of even the problems at the federal level. And I don't want, these flashes of tragedy to just fade. How many of these once in a lifetime weather events do we have to have before we realize we're going to have to take a different approach? We're going to have to demand a different approach. Things are different. The old ways don't work anymore. And I'm just realizing that sort of just asking the question, just advocating, just making your voice heard is a real act. It really matters. It really matters, because in the void, the silence becomes its own form of advocacy or its own justification for complacency.